My parents never even considered calling me by my actual name. To them, I was simply the worthless one. That was the brand they slapped on me since the days I barely recognized letters. Meanwhile, my brother Darren was honored like he descended from royalty. He was the prodigy, the symbol of pride for the Veal family, the one who earned a full ride to Harvard. On the day he graduated, my father stood proud before hundreds of attendees, boasting about the dynasty Darren would inherit. He pledged him the family's $75 million business, a brand new Tesla, and our $13 million estate in New York. Everyone applauded like it was a royal event. I sat quietly at the back, unseen, embarrassed, wondering how I could break free from the shadow they had wrapped around me. And then it came. A stranger I had never met approached me directly. He bent forward, handed me a thick, white envelope, and murmured into my ear, "It is time to show them who you truly are." In that instant, all I believed about myself and all my family assumed was on the verge of changing. I was raised in a home where love was awarded like medals, and only my brother Darren ever earned them. From my youngest memories, my father, Victor Veil, made it obvious who held value in our family. Darren was the miracle, the flawless son, the heir meant to carry the Veil name forward. I was the spare child, the one who never matched the perfection they demanded. At family dinners, I always sat in the same distant chair at the opposite end of the table. The long mahogany surface stretched between us, with my father ruling at the head, Darren at his right side, and my mother Marielle beside him, glowing with pride every time Darren said a word. By the time I attempted to speak, the conversation had already shifted on. I found that staying silent was easier than watching their dismissive glances. My father had a talent for breaking me down with just a sentence. I remember one evening when I was 14. Darren had just shared the news of being accepted into a top science course. The room erupted with joy. My father raised his drink and declared, "That is what being a Veal means. Brilliance, power, success." He turned toward me with a subtle grin. "And you, Aeron, you managed to pass Jim. Let us celebrate the small wins." Laughter followed. Even my mother laughed, though hers was softer, like she recognized the cruelty but had grown numb to it. It stung in ways I never knew how to express, not just because of the words, but because they never believed I could be more. My mother often muttered comparisons when she thought nobody else could hear. "Why are you not more like your brother?" she would remark while handing me a dish or tossing me socks. Her voice was calm, almost routine, but each word sank in like a stone falling deeper underwater. Darren excelled in that world. He played the perfect son with natural charm. Tall, well-featured, and full of certainty, he walked like the world belonged to him. He knew he was the chosen one and liked rubbing it in. At 16, I worked nights at a small diner to afford my own belongings. One evening, as I was leaving for work, Darren smirked from the couch, flanked by our parents' admiration. "Do not forget to scrub the grease from your hands before touching the handle. We cannot have the neighbors thinking the Veal family keeps a houseboy." My parents laughed like it was sharp humor while I left the house, pretending I felt nothing. But every jab like that wore me down. Only my grandfather, Eldon Veal, saw something else in me. He had started the family business years ago, building it from scratch into the empire my father ruled now. Eldon was gentler, patient, a man who valued people above profits. When I visited him, he never asked about test scores or awards. He asked what I was thinking about, what I hoped for, and what made me feel alive. One afternoon on his porch, he leaned in and said, "Aeron, do not confuse their blindness with truth. You possess something Darren does not. When the moment arrives, you will know. Never let them erase it." His words lingered, even though I did not fully understand them. I believed I was just the ignored child, living in the shadow of a family that equated love with medals and headlines. Home felt like a race I was never meant to win. My father molded Darren into his perfect successor. He brought him to boardrooms in his teens, exposed him to business deals, and bragged to every visitor that Darren was the future of the Veal empire. I was never brought along. I was told to mow the lawn, fetch items, or vanish. It felt like my presence was a task they tolerated. As we got older, the gap between us widened. Darren's acceptance into Harvard was treated like Christmas. My mother threw an immediate celebration, complete with catering and champagne. Strangers came up to me offering congratulations, assuming I shared in the pride. But behind my forced smile, I felt erased. as if my entire identity was reduced to just being Darren's sibling. I was 19 when I realized I could no longer wait on my parents for love or approval. I started juggling jobs, saving every cent, slowly building freedom they would never notice. While Darren returned from European adventures with glowing tales, I spent my summers boxing inventory and scrubbing floors. My parents scoffed at my efforts, calling it wasted time, not seeing that I was building strength they could not recognize. Still, the weight of their disapproval loomed whenever we gathered. My father's voice haunted me. "Aeron, you will never be anyone." My mother's looks trailed me down every hallway. Darren's mocking tone reminded me how easy life was for him. By the time his graduation neared, I had already prepared for the familiar shame. It was never whether they would favor him, it was how loud and cutting it would be. I expected to sit quietly again, to endure their praise for Darren while shrinking inside. What I could not predict was that the life they forced on me, filled with invisibility and hurt, was on the edge of crashing into a truth that would upend the entire family. I had no clue that the envelope awaiting me that day would confirm my grandfather's words, and that my quiet existence would not remain unbroken. The morning of Darren's graduation was a production from the second I opened my eyes. My parents acted like it was more significant than any holiday or life event we had previously celebrated. My mother, Marielle, darted around the mansion, barking instructions at the staff about flower placements, food services, and the arriving guest list. My father, Victor, stood beneath the grand staircase, fixing his cuff links, already mentally preparing the speech he would give to the hundreds in attendance. I had no part in the day's plans except to remain unseen. My suit was an old one Darren had outgrown, altered only enough to make it passable, and my seat at the graduation was assigned in the distant back rows. I watched from afar as Darren marched across the platform, his robe trailing, his name announced with deafening applause. My parents rose to their feet, clapping as if their own futures were being confirmed. I clapped too, though my palms felt cold and my stomach twisted. After the ceremony ended, the real event took over. Our family threw a luxurious reception inside a Manhattan ballroom illuminated with crystal chandeliers and golden reflections dancing across polished flooring. Doormen flanked the entrance while sleek black cars arrived in a constant flow. People from high-level business circles, political offices, and close social connections entered wearing fine suits and glittering gowns. They were not only there to honor Darren's achievement, but to witness the formal passing of the Veil Empire. I tried to go unnoticed. I leaned against the back wall, half concealed behind towering arrangements of white lilies. My existence was clearly tolerated, not acknowledged. Those who brushed past me gave weak nods. A few whispered, "That must be the other son," like I was an editorial note in a glowing headline. Then the moment I had dreaded arrived. My father stepped up to the raised platform with a microphone in his grip, his voice thundering across the grand room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight to celebrate my exceptional son, Aeron Veil." The crowd responded with more applause, and Darren, near the front, wore a smile shaped by a lifetime of privilege. Victor continued, his tone becoming more theatrical with every sentence. "As many of you know, the Veil family has not just built a company. We have built a name. Tonight, I proudly reveal that Darren will not only bear our name forward, but inherit the foundation of all we have achieved. The corporation, valued at $75 million, the newest Tesla Model X in the driveway, and the $13 million estate in New York, all of it shall be his. He is the next chapter of our family, and I could not be more honored." Applause surged again. Glasses chimed, voices cheered, and the sound of approval engulfed me. I stayed seated in the last row, my heart sinking further under each booming cheer. My mother leaned against my father's arm, her expression glowing with triumph, her fingers curled possessively, silently declaring, "We succeeded. Our perfect son has it all." For one fleeting second, Darren's eyes locked with mine. He lifted his glass in my direction, not in unity, but mockery. His grin carved with arrogance, his eyes gleaming with victory. The message in his glance could not be clearer. I was defeated. He had conquered. I wanted to dissolve, to vanish from the room full of shining smiles and forced admiration. The shame weighed more than it ever had. I thought back to the years I had toiled unnoticed, the nights I questioned my worth in solitude, always hoping, just faintly, that one day they might see me. That hope shattered as my father's words crowned Darren in public glory. My mother brushed past me on her way to the platform. She paused long enough to drop a whisper sharp as broken glass. "Do not ruin this day for your brother. Stay quiet." Then she moved on, her face resuming the proud mask as she took Darren's hand. The program resumed. Toasts erupted again, and I sat frozen in my chair. My fingers curled into fists beneath the table, my jaw clenched in an effort to stay composed. Grief tangled with fury in my chest, a storm I dared not let surface. I remembered my grandfather Eldon, the one person who ever treated me like I mattered. His voice echoed again in my mind. "One day, the truth will set you free." But what truth? All I saw was this cruel pattern. My parents had already cast their roles. Darren wore the crown, and I wore nothing. I was the misplaced son, the unwanted fixture dimmed beneath chandeliers while the rest of them gleamed. The struggle that shaped my entire life had reached its cruelest form. I had not just been sidelined, I had been wiped away. My father's announcement made it official, and every clap that followed rang like hammers against a coffin lid. In that dark instant, I was convinced I would remain silent forever, that I would stomach the evening as I had swallowed every insult, every backhanded remark, and every smirk. What I never expected was for that very night to hand me a new beginning. It happened just as the applause started to settle, as music resumed its rhythm, that I noticed a man moving steadily in my direction. He was not cheering. He did not smile. He held something in one hand, and his gaze was fixed solely on me. He walked with intention, weaving through tuxedos and laughter as if none of it held relevance. His eyes locked on mine with a steady weight that unsettled the air around us. He reached me with ease. Tall, severe in appearance, his expression unreadable. When he stopped beside my chair, he leaned slightly forward, placed a thick, white envelope onto the linen-draped table, and said with deliberate calm, "It is time to tell them who you really are." Before I found the words to respond, he tugged at his jacket sleeves, gave a small nod, and turned away, vanishing into the crowd like smoke. I sat completely still, eyes locked on the envelope resting against the polished wood. My hands trembled as they hovered above it. For years, I had been ignored, ridiculed, and silenced, but never had anyone hinted there was more to me than what my family had proclaimed. I pressed the envelope against my lap, shielding it from curious eyes. My heartbeat pounded so fiercely I feared it would burst through my ribs. I considered slipping out quietly, disappearing before anyone noticed, but the stranger's words repeated in my mind. Who I really am. What could that possibly imply? The voices from the stage droned on. Darren now stood beside my father, basking in attention while guests congratulated them both. Their words became background noise as my attention zeroed in on the sealed envelope. I slid one finger beneath the fold and paused. Part of me feared it was a trap, one last cruel joke from a world that had always mocked me. But then another part, the one still carrying Eldon's voice, urged me on. I tore open the seal. Inside were several documents, neatly organized, along with a folded, handwritten letter. The papers bore official seals and legal signatures. My eyes scanned the first sheet, and my breath halted when I saw my name clearly written. Not scribbled in afterthought, not as a side note, but in full authority. Shares of the Veil Corporation, ownership of the New York mansion, and bank accounts I had never known about, all listed under my name, Aeron Veil. The final page held a transfer of power signed years ago by my grandfather Eldon himself. My fingers shook harder. I unfolded the letter and saw the familiar, careful handwriting I had seen countless times. "Aeron, if you are reading this, the time has come. I watched both you and Darren grow, and I knew early on that the Veil future could not rest on pride or arrogance. I chose you because you understand pain, because you know how to survive without praise, and because you value people for their spirit rather than their status. Do not doubt your strength. Everything I built belongs to you." I stared at the ink until the words blurred. My grandfather had chosen me, not Darren, not Victor, not the image of greatness my family worshipped. For years, I believed their disdain reflected my worth. But here, now, was undeniable proof that the man who built everything saw me as the heir. My chest swelled with disbelief and defiance. I wanted to stand, to scream the truth into the faces of those who had overlooked me. But fear anchored me in place. My father stood beneath the golden lights, his voice heavy with pride, his reputation gleaming like the chandeliers above. To oppose him publicly would be unthinkable. Victor Veil had spent a lifetime cultivating power through fear and dominance. But I thought of every insult, every humiliation, every whispered comparison. My father's smirks, my mother's casual cruelty, Darren's condescending jokes. The nights I lay awake, wondering if I would ever matter. The years I swallowed my voice, desperate for acceptance. The envelope I held now was not just paper. It was proof. I tucked the folder into my jacket, pressing it tightly against my chest. The decision rose like fire inside me. I would not be silent again. Not this time. Not ever. The music softened as another toast began. Cheers echoed again for Darren, glasses rising in waves. I stood slowly, my knees unsure, but my purpose solid. For the first time, I felt taller than their scorn. As I stepped toward the stage, faces turned. My father saw me and frowned, clearly irritated. Darren's smirk returned, assuming I came to shower him in compliments, to play the obedient role once more. My mother's eyes sharpened, her head shaking slightly in warning. But Eldon's voice echoed louder than all of them. One day, the truth will set you free. That day was now. I climbed the steps with trembling legs and clenched fists. Victor leaned toward the mic, attempting to block me with a forced grin. Aeron, not now, he muttered, his tone dripping with warning. But I stood firm. My voice cracked at first, but gained strength. Actually, Father, this moment is mine. Silence swept the hall. Guests froze mid-toast. Darren's grin faltered. My father's eyes blazed with fury. I reached into my jacket and gripped the envelope tight. The stillness in the room was deafening. Hundreds of eyes fixed on me as I stood at center stage, holding the documents close to my chest. Victor took a step forward, voice low and dangerous. Aeron, sit down. Do not make a scene. For most of my life, I would have obeyed. I would have bowed my head, apologized for existing. But not anymore. My hands shook, but I raised the papers so everyone could see. I am not the one making a scene, I said, voice loud and clear. You are. A wave of gasps swept across the hall. Darren gave a short, awkward laugh, lifting his glass again. What are you doing? Stop before you humiliate yourself. I opened the folder and held up the signed legal documents. The Veil Corporation's seal shimmered under the chandelier glow. These are official transfers from Eldon Veil, I said, my tone now unwavering. He chose me. Not Darren. Not you, Father. Me. The company, the estate, the finances, they have all been under my name for years. The audience erupted into stunned whispers. Some guests stood to get a better look. Others traded shocked expressions. Victor lunged toward me, his face red with rage. This is absurd. That old man was senile. He had no idea what he was doing. But before he could touch the papers, another voice split the tension. I knew exactly what I was doing. All heads turned as my grandfather, Eldon Veil, slowly rose from a seat near the stage. His cane echoed against the marble with each firm step. Though his shoulders were hunched with age, he carried a presence stronger than anyone else in the room. When he reached me, he placed a firm hand on my shoulder. I entrusted those documents to a man I believed would know when to deliver them. That moment has come. I chose Aeron because I watched both of my grandsons grow into men. Darren, your intelligence is undeniable, but intelligence without humility leads to pride. Victor, you amassed fortune, but in the process, you abandoned empathy. Aeron has faced rejection and cruelty, but he did not allow it to corrupt him. He will lead because he understands the value of people, not just their power. The room reacted again, now with sharper gasps and ripples of conversation. Darren's complexion drained, the arrogance on his face fading. Grandfather, this must be a mistake, he said, stumbling. I have worked for everything. I've accomplished more than Aeron could ever dream of. Eldon turned to him with sorrow rather than fury. You pursued greatness for your own sake, Darren. That is not the mark of leadership. That is ego. Victor rounded on his father, his voice breaking with disbelief. You would hand over our legacy to the child who never measured up, to the one who could not uphold the Veil standard? Eldon's words sliced through the room. I am giving everything to the man who will redefine what the Veil legacy truly stands for. A stillness overtook the hall. Even the chandelier light seemed to dim under the weight of his words. For the first time in my life, I felt visible. not as a mistake, but as the rightful bearer of something far greater than status or wealth. I faced the crowd, my posture no longer stooped by years of shame. All my life, I had been told I was nothing, a disappointment, a shadow of my brother. Tonight, you heard my father say it again. But what you see before you now is not his lie. It is the truth. My grandfather believed in me when no one else did. I will not waste this gift. I will carry our legacy with integrity, one that uplifts people and not just profits. A few claps began quietly, hesitant at first, then rising. Soon the applause swelled into a full crescendo, overwhelming the silence that had suffocated me for so long. My father's expression turned crimson with fury, but he had no rebuttal. My mother's lips quivered, her mask of grace broken. Darren stood frozen, champagne glass still in hand, caught in disbelief. At the rear of the hall, I saw the man who delivered the envelope. He stood silently, watching, then nodded once and vanished into the crowd. Whoever he was, he had been the thread between my grandfather's promise and this moment of truth. I felt clarity crash through me. This was not about wealth. This was about release from the chains they had locked around me since I was a child. The humiliation, the silence, the cruelty, all of it had led to this reckoning. I turned to Eldon and dipped my head. Thank you for trusting me. He gave my shoulder a squeeze. Now prove me right. When I looked back at the guests, I no longer saw strangers staring at a disgrace. I saw witnesses to my rise. I saw the end of the story they had written and the beginning of my own. Darren's gaze fell, unable to meet mine. That familiar smirk was replaced with something he had never directed at me before: fear. Beneath the gleam of the chandeliers, I understood something vital. I had never been the fool. I had simply been waiting for my moment. The clapping softened into murmurs as the gravity of what had happened sank in. Victor's fists were tight at his sides, his voice low and bitter. This is not over. You are not ready for the consequences, Aeron. Then he turned, his steps echoing like thunder across the marble floor as he exited. My mother followed him, not meeting my eyes, her composure shattered. She had built a kingdom on illusion, and tonight it collapsed. Darren remained rooted in place, his hands shaking around the crystal stem of his drink. He glared at me with betrayal, as though I had stolen what he believed was his destiny. You do not deserve any of this, he spat. You are nothing. I looked him in the eyes, calm and unflinching. Maybe I am not what you expected, but I am what grandfather believes I am. And that is more than enough. I watched the truth hit him like a wave. His power had always come from my silence. That silence was gone. Eldon stood taller than I had ever seen him, even with the cane supporting him. His voice resonated with authority. This family changes tonight. The company is now in hands that know what it means to be dismissed. Aeron, the weight is yours, but so is the honor. His words carved themselves into my heart. I knew it would not be simple. Running a corporation that spanned cities and markets was an enormous task. But for the first time, I knew I had what it would take. Not to impress or shame anyone, but to do what was right, because someone finally saw what I carried inside. Slowly, the audience began applauding again, but now the cheers were for me. The noise washed over me like a tide undoing years of silence. I stood taller, the burden of invisibility finally lifted. Later, when the ballroom emptied and the chandeliers dimmed to a soft glow, I stepped outside into the cool night. New York's skyline shimmered, its lights stretching across the horizon. For years, I had looked up at that skyline thinking it was a world that would never be mine. Now it felt like a promise. A reward not for being perfect, but for surviving. I thought about the boy sitting alone at the table's edge, always unseen. I thought about the nights when I believed their insults, when I accepted the lie that I had no worth. And I thought about the man I was becoming, standing beneath city lights with truth in my hands. The truth was simple. Being underestimated does not define you. Sometimes, the most painful rejections prepare you to lead with strength no one expects. Labels are not destiny. What matters is the truth you carry and the courage to reveal it when the time arrives. My grandfather stepped beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. You understand now, do you not? He asked. I nodded. I do. Completely. He smiled, his eyes reflecting the skyline. Then carry it well. The future is in your hands. I breathed deeply, letting the air of a new beginning fill me. The fear, the wounds, the invisibility, they no longer owned me. I was never the broken one. I was the heir, chosen not for perfection, but for heart, for endurance, for truth forged in silence. And to those who are watching, those who have ever been called less, I want to leave you with this. Your worth is not measured by the voices that try to silence you. One day, your truth will rise. And when it does, it will be louder than every insult you have ever heard. Thank you for listening to my story. If it inspired you, share this message with someone who needs it. Leave a comment below and let me know what resonated most with you. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel.